The morning alarm screamed through the research station's corridors, its piercing wail cutting through the artificial atmosphere like a blade. Dr. Elena Vasquez bolted upright in her bunk, her heart hammering against her ribs as red emergency lights bathed everything in an ominous crimson glow. She had been dreaming of Earth again, of her small apartment in Barcelona, where the worst emergency was a neighbor's cat stuck in a tree. "All personnel report to stations immediately. This is not a drill." The voice of Commander Thex, the Krathari station chief, boomed through the intercom system. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by something Alina had never heard before: panic. Alina threw on her lab coat over her sleeping clothes and rushed into the hallway. The Zirian research station, perched on the edge of Krathari space, buzzed with frantic activity. Alien beings of various species hurried past her, their faces etched with worry. The station, normally a beacon of interspecies cooperation and scientific advancement, felt like a powder keg ready to explode. She found herself swept along with the crowd toward the central command center, a massive dome-shaped room that served as the nerve center of their operation. The walls displayed holographic star charts, atmospheric readings, and communication channels from across the galaxy. But today, all screens showed the same thing: a detailed map of the station's zoological research wing with several areas flashing angry red. Commander Thex stood at the center of it all, his reptilian features more pronounced under stress. His usually immaculate uniform was wrinkled, and his hands moved frantically over the control panels. Around him, his security team, all Krathari warriors who looked like they could tear apart a battle cruiser with their bare claws, stood rigid with tension. "Report," Thex barked as his chief of security approached. "Sir, the breach occurred at 3:47 hours. Security feeds show the containment field flickered for exactly 3.7 seconds. When it stabilized, the subjects were gone." Alina felt a chill run down her spine. She knew exactly what subjects they were talking about. For the past 6 months, she had been part of the team studying the most dangerous predators in known space, Vorthak cubs. The adult Vorthak were legendary among spacefaring species, apex predators that could hunt starships through asteroid fields and whose very presence could send entire fleets fleeing. But these weren't adults. They were cubs, barely 3 months old and supposedly manageable. Dr. Kine, the Velkari xenobiologist leading the project, pushed through the crowd with his usual arrogance. His species prided itself on being the most advanced scientists in the galaxy, and he never let anyone forget it. "This is impossible," he declared, his voice carrying that peculiar Velkari accent that made everything sound like a lecture. "The containment protocols I designed are flawless. The probability of simultaneous system failure across all barriers is less than." "Your probabilities don't matter when my station is compromised," Thex interrupted, his voice carrying a growl that made several nearby researchers step back. "These aren't ordinary predators. One adult Vorthak once destroyed an entire galactic defense fleet. We have 6 cubs loose somewhere in this station." Alina stepped forward, surprising herself with her boldness. As the only human on the station, she often felt like an outsider, a representative of a species so new to galactic politics that most beings still considered them primitive. "Commander, what do we know about their behavior patterns? Where would they likely go?" Dr. Kine scoffed. "Dr. Vasquez, with respect, human psychology hardly applies to apex predators that evolved on a world where the gravity alone would crush most species." "Actually," Alina continued, ignoring the slight, "all young mammals share certain basic needs: safety, warmth, food. If they're scared and separated from their parent, they'll seek out the closest substitute they can find." Thex studied her for a moment. Despite the Krathari reputation as warriors, Alina had learned that their commander was surprisingly thoughtful. "Explain." "Cubs this young don't understand complex social structures or species differences. They just know they need protection. In a strange environment, they'll gravitate toward whatever feels safest." "The central heating systems," suggested Lieutenant Zara, Thex's second-in-command. "The maintenance tunnels run warm." "Or the cargo bay," added Dr. Kine. "Plenty of hiding spots among the supply containers." Thex nodded grimly. "Deploy search teams. I want every section of this station swept. Use thermal scanners, motion detectors, everything we have. And remember, despite being cubs, these creatures could still tear through hull plating. No one goes anywhere alone." As the command center erupted into organized chaos, Alina found herself assigned to search Team Delta, tasked with sweeping the residential quarters. Her teammates included 2 Krathari security officers and a Velkari engineer, all of whom looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. She was used to it by now. Humans had only made first contact with the Galactic Council 15 years ago, and most species still viewed them as barely evolved apes who had somehow stumbled onto space travel. Their search began in the officers' quarters, massive suites designed for the larger alien species. The Krathari officers moved with predatory grace, their enhanced senses picking up details Alina could never hope to detect. But as they progressed through room after room, finding nothing, Alina began to notice something the others missed. "Wait," she said as they approached the human residential section. "Look at the ventilation grates." The others stopped and examined where she pointed. The metal grating over one of the air ducts had been pushed inward, leaving scratches in the metal that looked almost like claw marks. "Could be maintenance damage," muttered Officer Gromex, the larger of the 2 Krathari. "Or," Alina said, pulling out her personal scanner, "it could be something else." The device, primitive by galactic standards but perfectly adequate for her needs, showed traces of an unusual biochemical signature. "There's definitely something that passed through here recently, something that doesn't match any of the registered species on station." The group followed the trail through several more vents until they reached the human quarters. Alina's own room was at the end of the corridor, a modest space that she had tried to make as much like home as possible. Earth plants in small pots, pictures of family and friends, even an old physical book, luxuries that most aliens found incomprehensible. "The trail leads this way," she announced, following her scanner's readings. They reached her door and Alina's heart stopped. It was slightly ajar, though she clearly remembered sealing it when the alarm sounded. The biochemical signature was stronger here, much stronger. "Stay back," Officer Gromex growled, drawing his plasma weapon. "If they're in there, they're cornered. Cornered predators are the most dangerous kind." Alina nodded but couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something about this felt wrong, not dangerous, but different. As the team prepared to breach her quarters, she found herself thinking about her childhood dog, Rex, who used to hide under her bed during thunderstorms. Fear made creatures seek comfort in the most unexpected places. The door slid open with its usual soft hiss, and the team moved in tactical formation. Alina's quarters looked exactly as she had left them, except for one thing. The small reading nook she had created in the corner, complete with soft cushions and warm lighting, seemed somehow different. "Thermal readings show significant heat signatures," whispered the Velkari engineer, consulting his equipment. "Multiple sources very close together." They moved deeper into the room, weapons raised, until Officer Gromex suddenly stopped and held up a hand. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Alina strained her ears and then heard it too. A soft, rhythmic sound almost like purring, but deeper, more resonant than any Earth cat could produce. The sound was coming from her reading corner, specifically from behind the large cushion she used as a backrest. Moving slowly, Alina approached the area while her teammates covered her from behind. She could see something now, a slight movement behind the fabric. With infinite care, she moved the cushion aside and gasped. 6 small forms were curled together in a tight pile, their dark fur almost black in the dim lighting. At first glance, they looked almost like oversized panther cubs, but Alina could see the subtle differences that marked them as Vorthak. Their claws, even retracted, were longer and sharper than any Earth predator. Their skulls showed the pronounced bone ridges that would eventually develop into the armored crests of the adults. Most telling of all were their eyes, intelligent, alert, and far too knowing for creatures supposedly driven by instinct alone. But right now, they were doing the most ordinary thing in the universe. They were sleeping, curled together in a warm, soft spot, making the deep, rumbling purr that served as their species' equivalent of a contented sigh. "By the void," breathed Officer Gromex, lowering his weapon. "They're just sleeping." "This is unprecedented," whispered the Velkari engineer, already pulling out recording equipment. "Vorthak are solitary hunters as adults. This group behavior suggests." "SHH," Alina said softly, and to her surprise, the others actually quieted. "They're bobbies, scared, lost bobbies who found somewhere warm and safe." As if responding to her voice, one of the cubs opened its eyes. Alina expected to see the cold, calculating intelligence that Vorthak adults were known for. Instead, she saw something heartbreakingly familiar, the sleepy, confused look of any young animal waking up in a strange place. The cub made a small chirping sound, almost like a question, and Alina felt her heart melt. Without thinking, she extended her hand toward the little creature, moving slowly and keeping her posture non-threatening. "Dr. Vasquez, I strongly advise against," Officer Gromex began. But the cub had already made its decision. With movements far more graceful than any earth animal could manage, it approached Alina's outstretched hand and rubbed against her palm with a purr that vibrated through her bones. "Fascinating," murmured the Velkari engineer, his recording equipment working frantically. "The subject shows no signs of aggression or territorial behavior. In fact, it appears to be exhibiting classic juvenile bonding responses." The other cubs were waking up now, disturbed by the voices and movement. But instead of the aggressive posturing Alina had expected, they seemed curious, even friendly. One approached Officer Gromex and sniffed at his boots with obvious interest. Another began investigating the Velkari's recording equipment with the kind of focused attention that suggested high intelligence. "We need to report this immediately," Officer Gromex said, though he was now crouched down and carefully allowing one of the cubs to examine his hand. "The commander needs to know they're safe." Alina nodded but found herself reluctant to move. There was something profoundly peaceful about this moment, something that seemed to transcend the usual boundaries between species. These weren't the legendary predators of Spacer tailies. They were children, curious and trusting and innocent. "Alina to command," she said, activating her comm unit. "We've found them, all 6 cubs unharmed and... Well, you're not going to believe this, but they're in my quarters. And Commander, you might want to send Dr. Kine down here. I think he's going to find this very interesting." As they waited for the science team to arrive, Alina found herself sitting cross-legged on her floor with 6 of the most dangerous predators in known space using her as a jungle gym. One had claimed her lap, another was investigating her hair with gentle paws, and a third seemed fascinated by her heartbeat, pressing its ear against her chest with obvious contentment. The irony wasn't lost on her. These creatures, whose adult forms had sent entire fleets running in terror, had chosen a human, a member of one of the galaxy's newest and supposedly most primitive species, as their source of comfort and safety. When Dr. Kine finally arrived with his full research team, trailing sensors and recording equipment, he stopped dead in the doorway. His usually composed Velkari features showed an expression Alina had never seen before, complete and utter bewilderment. "This is," he began, then stopped, apparently unable to find words adequate to describe the scene. "Impossible," Alina suggested helpfully, scratching behind the ears of the cub in her lap, who responded with a purr that made her ribs vibrate. "I was going to say unprecedented," Dr. Kine replied, slowly entering the room as if afraid any sudden movement might break the spell. "In all our studies of Vorthak behavior, we've never observed anything like this. Adults are completely solitary. They don't even tolerate the presence of their own offspring once they reach maturity." "But these aren't adults," Alina pointed out. "They're bobbies, and bobbies of any species need comfort, protection, and warmth. It doesn't matter if they're human bobbies or Vorthak cubs, the basic needs are the same." Dr. Kine was setting up his equipment now, his scientific curiosity overriding his preconceptions. "The bonding response is remarkable. They've clearly identified you as a parental figure, despite the obvious species differences." Alina looked down at the small predator curled in her lap, noting how its breathing had synchronized with hers. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe species differences don't matter as much as we think they do, especially to children." As word spread throughout the station, more and more researchers and personnel found reasons to visit Alina's quarters. The sight of 6 Vorthak cubs treating a human like their adoptive mother became the most documented phenomenon in recent galactic history. But for Alina, the wonder wasn't in the scientific implications. It was in the simple, universal truth that all children, regardless of their species or their potential, needed the same basic things: safety, warmth, and someone who cared about them. As she sat there, serving as a living pillow for 6 of the galaxy's most feared predators, Alina realized that maybe humanity's so-called primitive emotions weren't a weakness after all. Maybe they were exactly what the galaxy needed. 3 days had passed since the cubs chose Alina as their guardian, and the Zirian research station had transformed from a place of scientific study into something resembling a galactic zoo. Word had spread through the communication networks faster than a hyperspace jump, and every day brought new requests for visits, interviews, and study proposals from across known space. Alina found herself at the center of a phenomenon that no one quite knew how to handle. The Cubs, who had been designated as Subject Group Alpha 7 in the official reports, had completely refused to return to their original containment area. Every attempt to relocate them resulted in distressed calls that could be heard 3 decks away and behavior that bordered on the destructive. They would only calm down when returned to Alina's quarters, where they immediately resumed their peaceful, almost domestic routine. Dr. Kine had initially insisted that this was temporary behavior that would fade as the cubs matured. Juvenile imprinting is common across many species, he had explained to the growing crowd of scientists who seemed to live permanently in the corridor outside Alina's door. They will eventually outgrow this dependency and revert to their natural predatory instincts. But as Alina watched the cubs during their daily activities, she wasn't so sure. These weren't mindless animals driven by instinct. They showed problem-solving abilities that impressed even the most experienced xenobiologists, communication patterns that suggested complex social understanding, and most remarkably, what could only be described as empathy. This morning, like every morning since they had moved in with her, Alina woke to find herself covered in a warm blanket of fur and gentle purring. The cubs had developed a routine of sleeping in a protective circle around her bed, taking turns on watch duty in a pattern that spoke of sophisticated pack behavior. When her alarm sounded, they didn't scatter in panic like wild animals. Instead, they stretched, yawned, and began their morning greeting ritual. Each cub had developed its own way of saying good morning to Alina. The largest, whom she had started thinking of as guardian despite the researchers' insistence on using designation Alpha 1, would gently headbutt her shoulder in a gesture that reminded her of an affectionate cat. The smallest, curious, Alpha 6, would climb onto her chest and chirp softly until she opened her eyes. The others had their own unique behaviors, creating a morning symphony of purrs, chirps, and gentle nudges that was far more pleasant than any alarm clock. "Good morning, everyone," Alina murmured, sitting up carefully to avoid disturbing the cub still draped across her legs. "Ready for another day of being famous." The cubs responded with various sounds of contentment, and Alina couldn't help but smile. In the 3 days since their unconventional bonding, she had learned to interpret their different vocalizations. The deep, resonant purr meant contentment and safety. The higher-pitched chirping was curiosity or a request for attention. The soft, trilling sound they made when they touched noses with each other seemed to be their way of sharing affection. A soft chime from her door announced the arrival of her daily visitor, Dr. Sarah Chen, a human xenopsychologist who had arrived on the first transport after news of the cubs broke. Alina appreciated having another human on the station, especially one whose expertise might help explain what was happening. "Come in, Sarah," Alina called, and the door slid open to reveal the petite scientist carrying her usual armload of recording equipment and data tablets. "Morning, Alina. Morning, kids," Dr. Chen said cheerfully, settling herself in the chair that had become her permanent observation post. The cubs had initially been wary of the newcomer, but Dr. Chen's patient, non-threatening approach had won them over. Now Guardian approached her for his customary greeting sniff, while Curious immediately began investigating her equipment. "Any new insights from yesterday's data?" Alina asked, gently extracting herself from the pile of cubs so she could prepare for the day. Dr. Chen pulled up several holographic displays from her tablet. "Actually, yes. The behavioral patterns we're seeing aren't matching any known predator profiles. The cubs are exhibiting characteristics we typically see in highly social species: cooperative hunting practice, shared territorial responsibility, and most remarkably, apparent emotional bonding not just with you, but with each other." Alina watched as the cubs moved around her quarters with practiced ease, each one having claimed certain areas as their own while still maintaining the group dynamic. Guardian had appointed himself protector of the sleeping area, positioning himself where he could watch both the door and Alina simultaneously. Curious had claimed the desk area, where Alina's research materials seemed to fascinate him. The others had found their own niches, but all within easy reach of each other and Alina. "Dr. Kine still insists it's temporary," Alina said, pulling on her lab coat while playful Alpha 3 attempted to help by tugging on the sleeves with his teeth. "Dr. Kine is letting his preconceptions cloud his observation," Dr. Chen replied diplomatically. The Velkari pride themselves on being the galaxy's premier xenobiologists, but they tend to categorize behaviors based on adult characteristics rather than considering developmental psychology. A commotion in the corridor outside interrupted their conversation. Voices, some angry, some excited, grew louder as they approached Alina's door. She exchanged a look with Dr. Chen. This didn't sound like the usual parade of curious scientists. The door chimed insistently, and Alina opened it to find Commander Thex accompanied by a group of beings she didn't recognize. Their uniforms marked them as Galactic Council officials, and their expressions suggested this wasn't a social visit. Dr. Vasquez, Commander Thex said formally, his tone carefully neutral. These representatives from the Council's Xenobiological Safety Commission need to discuss the situation with the Cubs. The lead official, a tall Andromedian with the typical silver skin and oversized cranium of his species, stepped forward. I am Commissioner Vex 9. We've come to conduct a formal evaluation of the containment breach and determine appropriate measures for securing these dangerous specimens. Alina felt a chill run down her spine, and apparently the Cubs sensed her emotional state. Guardian immediately moved to her side, positioning himself between Alina and the strangers, while the others formed a loose defensive formation around the room. Their posture wasn't aggressive, but there was no mistaking the protective intent. Commissioner, Alina said carefully, as you can see, the Cubs aren't dangerous. They've been completely peaceful for 3 days. Commissioner Vex 9 consulted a data pad with a kind of bureaucratic efficiency that Alina had learned to distrust. Dr. Vasquez, these specimens represent a Class A galactic threat. Adult Vorthak have been responsible for 17 confirmed ship destructions and an estimated 1,200 casualties over the past century. The probability of juvenile specimens maintaining docile behavior as they mature is statistically negligible. But they're not statistics, Alina protested. They're individuals with their own personalities and behaviors. Look at them, do they look dangerous to you? As if to prove her point, Curious approached the group of officials with obvious interest, tilting his head in a gesture that any sentient being would recognize as friendly curiosity. Several of the officials stepped back nervously, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. Dr. Kine, who had apparently been summoned to provide scientific testimony, appeared in the doorway. Commissioner, while Dr. Vasquez has certainly achieved an unprecedented level of behavioral control over the subjects, I must agree that the long-term risks are significant. Vorthak undergo substantial neurochemical changes as they mature. Current docility provides no guarantee of future behavior. Alina felt her temper flare. Behavioral control, is that what you think this is? She gestured to Guardian, who was now sitting calmly beside her but clearly alert to any threat. I'm not controlling them, we're living together as a family. Commissioner Vex 9's expression showed the kind of polite skepticism that bureaucrats across the galaxy had perfected. Dr. Vasquez, with respect, your species' tendency toward emotional anthropomorphization is well documented. These are predators, not pets. Before Alina could respond, something remarkable happened. All 6 cubs moved simultaneously, not in attack formation, but in what could only be described as a presentation stance. They arranged themselves in a neat line in front of Alina, their posture formal and deliberate. Guardian chirped once, a sound Alina had never heard before, and the others responded in perfect harmony with a complex vocalization that sent shivers down her spine. The room fell silent. Even Commissioner Vex 9 looked taken aback by the obvious intelligence and coordination the cubs had displayed. Dr. Chen broke the silence, her voice filled with wonder. They understand what's happening. They know these people are here to separate them from Alina, and they're trying to communicate their objection. Remarkable, Dr. Kine muttered, his scientific curiosity overriding his preconceptions. The coordination suggests a level of social intelligence far beyond our previous assessments. Commissioner Vex 9, however, seemed unimpressed. Clever or not, they remain a significant threat. I'm ordering immediate transfer to a maximum security facility on Kepler Station, where they can be properly contained while we determine the best course of action. Alina felt her heart sink, but before she could protest, Guardian stepped forward and did something that left everyone speechless. The young Vorthak approached Commissioner Vex 9 directly, sat down at a respectful distance, and extended one paw in a gesture that was universally recognized across a dozen species as a formal greeting. The commissioner stared at the offered paw for a long moment, his silver features reflecting a complex mix of emotions. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he extended his own hand and briefly touched the cub's paw. Guardian purred once, a sound of such pure contentment that several of the officials seemed to relax despite themselves. Then he returned to Alina's side, his message clear. They were capable of civilized interaction, but their loyalty remained with their chosen family. "Commissioner," Alina said quietly, "give us more time. Let us prove that these cubs can integrate peacefully with galactic society. They're not monsters, they're children who need guidance and care." Commissioner Vex 9 looked around the room, taking in the scene, 6 young predators displaying complex social behaviors, a human scientist who had somehow earned their absolute trust, and research data that challenged every assumption about their species. "1 week," he said finally. "You have 1 week to demonstrate that these specimens can be safely maintained in their current situation. But Dr. Vasquez, if there is any sign of aggression, any indication that they pose a threat to station personnel, the transfer will proceed immediately." After the officials left, Alina slumped into her chair, emotionally drained. The cubs seemed to sense her distress and immediately surrounded her, offering the kind of comfort that transcended species barriers. Guardian rested his head on her lap while Curious nuzzled her hand, and the others simply made themselves available, their presence a reminder that she wasn't alone in this challenge. "A week," Dr. Chen said thoughtfully. "It's not much time to change thousands of years of galactic prejudice." Alina looked down at Guardian, whose intelligent eyes seemed to understand far more than any dumb animal should. "Then we'd better make it count." As evening approached and the station settled into its night cycle, Alina found herself reflecting on the day's events. The cubs had resumed their normal routine as if nothing had happened, but she could sense an underlying tension in their behavior. They understood that their peaceful existence was threatened, and the knowledge seemed to weigh on them. That night, as she prepared for bed, Alina noticed that the cub's protective formation was tighter than usual. Guardian positioned himself directly between the door and Alina's bed, while the others arranged themselves in overlapping fields of coverage. They weren't just protecting her anymore, they were protecting their family, and they seemed to understand that the threat was far from over. As she drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the gentle sounds of breathing and purring, Alina made a silent promise. She would find a way to prove that love and trust could bridge any gap between species. She had to, because the alternative, watching these remarkable creatures be locked away simply because of what they might become, was unthinkable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in the safety of their chosen family, 6 young Vorthak cubs dreamed peaceful dreams while their human guardian stood watch over their future. The demonstration was scheduled for day 5 of their 1-week deadline, and Alina hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Every moment had been spent preparing what she hoped would be the most important presentation of her career, and possibly the most important presentation in interspecies relations history. The main conference room of Zirian Station had been transformed into an impromptu auditorium. Representatives from 7 major galactic species sat in carefully arranged seating, their various atmospheric and gravitational requirements accommodated by the station's adaptive environment systems. Commissioner Vex 9 occupied the central position, flanked by military advisors, xenobiologists, and what Alina suspected were political observers whose real purpose was to determine humanity's fitness for continued galactic citizenship. The weight of that responsibility sat heavily on her shoulders as she stood at the front of the room with 6 young Vorthak cubs arranged calmly around her feet. They seemed to sense the importance of the moment, their usual playful energy replaced by an almost formal composure that was both impressive and heartbreaking. "Honored delegates," Alina began, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "3 weeks ago, these cubs were classified as specimens for study. Today, I want to introduce you to 6 individuals who have the potential to change how we understand intelligence, communication, and cooperation across species boundaries." She gestured to Guardian, who stepped forward with the kind of precise movement that spoke of careful rehearsal. "This is Guardian, designation Alpha 1. He has appointed himself protector of our family unit and has demonstrated strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and what can only be called leadership qualities." Guardian approached the nearest delegate, a Krathari military advisor whose species was known for their warrior culture and respect for strength. To everyone's surprise, Guardian executed what was unmistakably a formal military salute, holding the position until the startled advisor returned the gesture. Murmurs rippled through the audience as Guardian returned to Alina's side. Dr. Kine, who was providing scientific commentary, looked both fascinated and troubled. The subject appears to have learned and adapted military protocol based on observation of station personnel interactions. Not learned, Alina corrected gently. Understood. Guardian didn't just memorize a gesture, he understood its meaning and context. She looked directly at Commissioner Vex 9. That's not the behavior of a mindless predator. That's the behavior of an intelligent being seeking to communicate respect and peaceful intent. Next, she called forward Curious, whose fascination with technology had led to some remarkable developments over the past few days. Curious has been working with Dr. Chen to explore interactive learning protocols. Alina activated a holographic puzzle that Dr. Chen had designed, a three-dimensional maze that required spatial reasoning, memory, and problem-solving skills to navigate. The puzzle was calibrated for adult Velkari intelligence levels, considered among the highest in known space. Curious approached the hologram with obvious interest, studying it from multiple angles before placing his paw on the control interface. What happened next stunned the assembled delegates into silence. The young Vorthak didn't just solve the puzzle. He solved it in less than half the time it typically took adult Velkari to complete the same task. And he did it while making soft, chirping sounds that Dr. Chen's equipment identified as mathematical sequences. Fascinating, breathed Dr. Kine. The subject appears to be thinking through the solution audibly, using a form of numerical reasoning that we've never documented in Vorthak behavior patterns. Alina smiled. Curious isn't just solving puzzles, he's teaching us how he thinks. Over the past week, Dr. Chen has been working with him to develop a basic mathematical communication system. Show them, Curious. The cub approached the holographic display again, this time using his claw to trace symbols in the air. The display captured his movements and translated them into galactic standard notation. 2 plus 2 equals 4, 5x3 equals 15, and then more complex equations that demonstrated understanding of advanced mathematical principles. Commissioner Vex 9 leaned forward in his seat. Dr. Vasquez, are you suggesting that this juvenile Vorthak has learned mathematics? No, Commissioner. I'm suggesting that he already knew mathematics, and we've just found a way for him to show us. Alina looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each delegate. We've been thinking about this all wrong. We've been so focused on adult Vorthak behavior that we never considered the possibility that cubs might be completely different beings. She gestured to the remaining 4 cubs. Each of them has shown unique abilities and personality traits. Healer has demonstrated an instinctive understanding of medical procedures, often detecting injuries or illness in station personnel before our medical scanners do. Artist creates complex patterns in sand and arranges objects in formations that our art specialists classify as genuinely aesthetic. Explorer maps ventilation systems and maintains detailed mental charts of the station's layout. And Peaceful. Alina paused, looking at the smallest cub with particular affection. Peaceful seems to understand emotions across species barriers. She's comforted crying Andromedians, calmed aggressive Krathari, and somehow knows exactly what each person needs to feel better. Dr. Chen stepped forward, carrying her data tablet. The behavioral analysis supports Dr. Vasquez's observations. These cubs display individual personalities, specialized talents, and most remarkably, what appears to be genuine altruism. They don't just coexist with Alina, they actively care for her welfare and the welfare of others around them. But what happens when they mature? Demanded a Velkari delegate. Adult Vorthak show no such social behaviors. They're solitary predators with no documented cases of peaceful interaction with other species. Alina had been dreading this question, but she also thought she might have an answer. What if that's not natural Vorthak behavior? What if adult Vorthak become antisocial because they're raised in isolation without proper socialization? The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Dr. Kine looked genuinely shocked. Dr. Vasquez, that's pure speculation. There's no evidence that environmental factors influence Vorthak behavioral development. There's no evidence against it either, Alina replied firmly. We've never studied Vorthak cubs raised in social environments because we've never had the opportunity. These 6 are the first cubs to be raised with positive social interaction, emotional support, and educational stimulation. What if the aggressive, antisocial behavior we see in adults is actually the result of trauma and isolation? Commissioner Vex 9 consulted his data pad, his expression thoughtful. You're proposing that an entire species' behavioral profile is based on incomplete data. I'm proposing that we've been studying the wrong thing, Alina said. We've been studying damaged adults and assuming that damage was natural. But what if it's not? What if Vorthak are naturally social, intelligent beings who become dangerous only when they're denied the social structures they need to develop properly? To demonstrate her point, Alina activated a recording that Dr. Chen had made the previous day. It showed the 6 cubs engaged in what could only be called a group problem-solving session. They had encountered a sealed container in Alina's quarters and had worked together to open it, with each cub contributing different skills to the effort. Guardian provided the strength, Curious figured out the mechanism, Healer ensured no one was injured in the process, and the others provided support and encouragement. This isn't pack hunting behavior, Dr. Chen narrated over the recording. This is collaborative intelligence. They're not just working together, they're teaching each other. The recording continued, showing the cubs sharing the contents of the container, Alina's earth chocolate, which they had apparently developed a taste for, in a carefully equitable distribution that ensured even the smallest got an appropriate share. When the recording ended, the conference room was silent. Finally, Commissioner Vex 9 spoke. Dr. Vasquez, you're asking us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about one of the galaxy's most dangerous species based on the behavior of 6 juveniles. Yes, Alina said simply. I am. Because the alternative is condemning 6 innocent beings to imprisonment for crimes they haven't committed and might never commit if given the chance to develop naturally. A new voice spoke from the back of the room. What about long-term studies? The speaker was Ambassador Thrix, a Galactic Council representative whose opinion carried significant weight in policy decisions. If Dr. Vasquez's theory is correct, we would need years of observation to confirm behavioral stability through maturation. Alina felt a surge of hope. The fact that they were discussing long-term studies instead of immediate removal meant her arguments were having an effect. I'm prepared to commit to a comprehensive long-term study, she said. With proper support and resources, we could document every aspect of their development, create protocols for Vorthak socialization, and potentially develop new approaches to interspecies relations. Dr. Kine finally spoke up, his voice showing a mix of scientific curiosity and professional caution. The research potential is undeniable. If Dr. Vasquez's hypothesis proves correct, we would be rewriting xenobiology textbooks. But the risks can be managed, Alina interrupted. These cubs have had countless opportunities to harm station personnel over the past week. Instead, they've helped injured workers, entertained children during family visits, and even assisted with minor maintenance tasks. They're not becoming more dangerous as they grow, they're becoming more helpful. Guardian, as if understanding the importance of the moment, approached Commissioner Vex 9 directly. The cub sat in front of the commissioner's chair and began to purr, a sound that filled the room with warmth and contentment. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to Alina's eyes, Guardian gently placed his head against the commissioner's hand, offering complete trust to someone who had the power to determine his fate. Commissioner Vex 9 looked down at the young predator offering him such absolute vulnerability, and for a moment, his bureaucratic mask slipped. Alina saw something she hadn't expected: compassion. 1 year, he said finally. We'll authorize a 1-year provisional study period with full documentation and regular evaluation. Dr. Vasquez, you'll have access to additional research staff and resources, but you'll also be under constant observation. Any sign of dangerous behavior from any of the cubs will result in immediate termination of the project. Alina felt her knees go weak with relief. Thank you, Commissioner. You won't regret this decision. As the delegates filed out, discussing the implications of what they had witnessed, Alina found herself surrounded by 6 cubs who seemed to understand that they had just won a reprieve. Their purrs created a symphony of contentment that resonated through the conference room, and Alina realized that this was just the beginning. She had a year to prove that love, patience, and understanding could overcome thousands of years of prejudice and fear. It would be the greatest challenge of her scientific career. But as she looked down at Guardian's trusting eyes and felt curious investigating her pockets for hidden treats, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time since this adventure started, Alina believed they might actually change the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be a predator and what it meant to be family. 6 months into the approved study period, Zirian Research Station had become the most famous scientific facility in known space. Alina stood in her expanded quarters. The station administration had given her an entire deck to accommodate both the growing cubs and the constant stream of researchers, diplomats, and media representatives who came to witness the impossible. The cubs had grown significantly over the past half-year, now reaching Alina's waist in height and displaying the lean, powerful build that would eventually make them apex predators. But their behavior had evolved in directions that continued to confound every expert who studied them. This morning brought a particularly important test. Dr. Marina Volkov, the galaxy's leading expert on predator psychology, had arrived with a specialized testing protocol designed to measure aggressive tendencies in developing carnivores. She stood in Alina's living area, surrounded by equipment that looked more suitable for a military installation than a behavioral study. "Dr. Vasquez," Dr. Volkov said in her heavily accented standard, "I must stress that these tests are designed to trigger natural predatory responses. If your subjects are indeed domesticated, they should show minimal aggressive reaction, but if their predatory instincts are merely suppressed." "I understand the risks," Alina replied, though she couldn't hide her nervousness. The cubs had never shown true aggression, but Dr. Volkov's tests were designed to push boundaries that had never been tested before. Guardian, now almost as large as a small earth lion, approached the strange equipment with curiosity rather than suspicion. His movements had gained the fluid grace that marked his species, but Alina still saw the same gentle intelligence in his eyes that had first captivated her. "We'll start with the prey-response test," Dr. Volkov announced, activating a holographic projector. The device created a realistic simulation of a Deltan rabbit, one of the most common prey species in Vorthak hunting grounds. The hologram moved with erratic, panic-induced motions designed to trigger hunting instincts in any predator. Alina held her breath as all 6 cubs turned to observe the hologram. Their heads moved in unison, tracking the prey animal's movements with the kind of coordinated attention that should have preceded an attack. Dr. Volkov raised her recording equipment, clearly expecting to document the moment when their careful socialization broke down and natural instinct took over. Instead, Curious tilted his head in what Alina had learned to recognize as his thinking pose. He approached the hologram slowly, not in a stalking crouch, but with obvious scientific interest. When he reached the projection, he gently pawed at it, discovering its immaterial nature. Then he did something that made Dr. Volkov nearly drop her equipment. He turned to the projector, studied its mechanism for a moment, and then began to manipulate the controls with careful precision. The panicked rabbit simulation transformed into a peaceful grazing scene, with multiple animals moving in natural, calm patterns. "Remarkable," Dr. Volkov breathed. "The subject recognized the artificial distress signals and corrected them." Alina nodded, though she was just as amazed as the visiting expert. Curious has always been bothered by signs of distress in any creature. He once spent an hour trying to comfort an injured maintenance robot. Healer approached the peaceful hologram now, examining the animals with professional interest. Over the past months, she had developed an uncanny ability to diagnose health problems in both humans and aliens. She studied the grazing creatures, then moved to Dr. Volkov's equipment and began adjusting settings with delicate precision. "What is she doing?" Dr. Volkov asked, her voice filled with scientific fascination. Alina watched as Healer's modifications subtly improved the hologram's anatomical accuracy, correcting small flaws in the simulation that had apparently bothered her medical sensibilities. "I think she's practicing. She's been helping Dr. Chen develop new medical training programs." The next test involved food competition, multiple portions of a highly desirable food source to see if the cubs would display territorial or aggressive behavior toward each other. Dr. Volkov placed 6 containers of synthetic protein cubes around the room, each one designed to trigger competitive feeding responses. The cubs approached the containers with interest, but instead of the aggressive scramble Dr. Volkov expected, they began a complex social interaction. Guardian sniffed each container, then made a series of low vocalizations that the other cubs responded to with obvious understanding. Within moments, they had arranged themselves so that each cub sat near a container, but none began eating. They're waiting, Alina realized. They're waiting to make sure everyone has food before anyone starts eating. Only when Guardian gave what was clearly a permission signal did the cubs begin their meal, and even then, they shared freely. Peaceful actually pushed her entire portion toward Artist, who had been working on an intricate sculpture all morning and had apparently forgotten to eat. Dr. Volkov deactivated her recording equipment with hands that shook slightly. Dr. Vasquez, in 30 years of studying predator behavior, I have never seen anything like this. These creatures are exhibiting social cooperation patterns that we typically only see in the most advanced civilized species. They are civilized, Alina said simply. That's what we've been trying to tell everyone. The final test was the most challenging, a simulation designed to trigger protective aggression by threatening something the cubs valued. Dr. Volkov activated a holographic scenario showing Alina in apparent danger, complete with distress vocalizations and threatening figures. The cubs' response was immediate and coordinated, but it wasn't the mindless aggression Dr. Volkov had expected to document. Guardian moved to place himself between the threat and Alina, while Healer began checking Alina for injuries. Curious started analyzing the holographic projectors, clearly trying to understand the nature of the threat. Explorer moved to secure the room's exits, and Artist began creating what looked like barrier formations with available objects. Peaceful did something that brought tears to Alina's eyes. She moved to comfort Dr. Volkov, apparently sensing that the researcher was distressed by the test situation. Tactical intelligence, Dr. Volkov murmured, her recorder forgotten in her amazement. They're not just being protective, they're implementing a coordinated defense strategy while simultaneously providing medical support and threat analysis. Alina knelt down as Guardian approached her, his eyes showing concern for her well-being. It's okay, she assured him. It was just a test. Everyone's safe. Guardian's response nearly stopped Alina's heart. In perfectly accented standard, he said, Alina safe, pack safe, good. The room fell silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. Dr. Volkov's recorder clattered to the floor as her nerveless fingers lost their grip. Did he just? Dr. Volkov began, then stopped, apparently unable to finish the question. Guardian's been working on verbal communication for weeks, Alina said, her voice steady despite the emotional impact of hearing her family member speak for the first time. Dr. Chen has been helping him with pronunciation exercises. Curious not to be outdone by his pack leader, approached Dr. Volkov and carefully said, Science good, learn together. Over the next hour, as word spread throughout the station, Alina's quarters filled with researchers, diplomats, and officials. Each of the cubs demonstrated their verbal abilities, though their vocabulary was still limited, and their pronunciation marked by their physiological differences. But the intelligence behind the words was undeniable. Dr. Kine arrived with his full research team, his usual professional composure completely shattered. This changes everything, he said, settling heavily into a chair as Artist offered him a drink of water with careful politeness. We're not just dealing with intelligent predators, we're dealing with a sapient species. Commissioner Vex 9's response came within hours via priority communication link. His image appeared on the main screen with an expression Alina had never seen before, wonder mixed with deep concern. Dr. Vasquez, he began without preamble, the implications of what you've documented today extend far beyond xenobiology. If these cubs are truly sapient, then every adult Vorthak we've classified as a dangerous predator may actually be a victim of circumstances that prevented proper development. Alina nodded gravely. That's exactly what we think happened, Commissioner. Adult Vorthak aren't naturally antisocial killers. They're damaged individuals who never had the chance to develop properly. The legal implications alone are staggering, Commissioner Vex 9 continued. We're potentially looking at reclassifying an entire species from dangerous fauna to sentient beings with full galactic rights. Guardian, who had been listening to the conversation with obvious interest, approached the communication screen. "Adults, hurt?" he asked, his voice showing a level of empathy that reached through the screen to touch even the bureaucratic heart of Commissioner Vex 9. "Yes," Alina said gently, kneeling beside Guardian. "We think the adult Vorthak are in pain, and that's why they act aggressively." Guardian considered this for a long moment, then looked directly at Commissioner Vex 9. "Help adults, fix pain." The commissioner's silence stretched for nearly a minute before he responded. "Guardian, if that's possible, if we can find a way to help adult Vorthak overcome their trauma and develop proper social skills, would you be willing to help us try?" Guardian looked at his pack siblings, and Alina watched as they communicated in their rapid series of chirps and trills that had become their private language. Finally, Guardian turned back to the screen. "Pack helps family." After the communication ended, Alina found herself alone with her 6 cubs for the first time in days. The weight of what they had accomplished was beginning to sink in, along with the magnitude of what lay ahead. "We did it," she said softly, settling into her favorite chair as the cubs arranged themselves around her in their familiar protective formation. "We proved that you're people, not animals." Curious climbed onto her lap, his weight now requiring the chair's reinforcement modifications. "Alina tired," he observed with concern. "A little," Alina admitted. "But it's good tired. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. If we're right about the adult Vorthak, we might be able to help an entire species heal from centuries of trauma." Guardian rested his large head against her shoulder. "Alina, teach, we learn, help others learn." As night settled over the station and the cubs settled into sleep around her, Alina reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had started as a simple research assignment had become something far greater, a proof that understanding and compassion could bridge any gap between species. But she knew the real challenge was just beginning. Somewhere in the galaxy, adult Vorthak were living lives of isolation and pain, their natural social instincts buried under layers of trauma. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that love and patience could heal even the deepest wounds. As Guardian's gentle purring lulled her toward sleep, Alina smiled. They had shown the galaxy that predators could be people, that monsters could be family. Now they had to show them something even more remarkable, that the most damaged hearts could still learn to love. 1 year after the Great Demonstration, the galaxy was a different place. Alina stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Vorthak Integration Center, watching a scene that would have been impossible to imagine when this journey began. Below her, in a specially designed habitat that combined the best elements of natural Vorthak environments with advanced social spaces, 6 young adults were teaching a class. Guardian, now nearly Alina's height and possessing the lean, powerful build of his species, stood before a group of mixed-species youngsters who had come to learn about interspecies communication. His voice, deeper now but still carrying the gentle tone Alina had come to love, filled the classroom as he demonstrated hunting techniques that had been adapted into games of strategy and cooperation. "Patience most important," he explained to a young Andromedian child who was struggling with a particularly complex puzzle. "Not rush. Think first, then act. Pack waits, pack helps." Curious had become the center's chief technology integration specialist, working with the galaxy's best engineers to develop communication devices that could translate Vorthak vocalizations into any galactic language. His natural facility with mathematics had evolved into a deep understanding of quantum mechanics that impressed even Velkari scientists. Healer had surprised everyone by requesting formal medical training. Dr. Chen, now the center's director of psychological services, had worked with the Galactic Medical Council to develop the first interspecies medical certification program. Healer's unique physiology allowed her to detect health problems that conventional scanners missed, making her one of the most sought-after diagnosticians in the sector. But perhaps the most remarkable change wasn't in the cubs themselves. It was in what their success had made possible for others of their species. A soft chime announced an incoming priority transmission. Alina activated the communication system to find Commissioner Vex 9's familiar face, but his expression was more animated than she had ever seen it. "Dr. Vasquez, I have news. The first adult rehabilitation attempt has achieved breakthrough status." Alina's heart leaped. For 8 months, They had been working with a volunteer adult Vorthak named Sigma-7, a former solitary hunter who had agreed to participate in the experimental socialization program. The process had been slow and difficult, requiring patience from everyone involved as they helped Sigma-7 overcome decades of isolation and trauma. "How breakthrough?" Elena asked, hardly daring to hope. "See for yourself," Commissioner Vex 9 said, and his image was replaced by a live feed from the rehabilitation facility on Kepler Station. The scene showed a large, comfortable room designed to feel safe and non-threatening. In the center, a magnificent adult Vorthak sat calmly while a human child, the daughter of one of the research staff, carefully braided decorative ribbons into his mane. The adult's eyes, which should have been cold and calculating according to every textbook ever written about his species, showed the same gentle intelligence that Alina had first seen in Guardian's young face. "Patient progression has exceeded all expectations," came the voice of Dr. Martinez, the rehabilitation specialist. "Sigma-7 now demonstrates full emotional regulation, cooperative behavior, and most remarkably, he's expressed interest in meeting the cubs he's heard so much about." Alina felt tears streaming down her face. "When?" "Tomorrow," Commissioner Vex 9 replied, his own voice emotional. "Sigma-7 specifically requested to meet Guardian. He said, and I quote, 'Want to meet the little one who showed the galaxy that we are more than monsters.'" The reunion took place in the center's main social area, a spacious room designed to accommodate beings of various sizes and environmental needs. Alina stood with the cubs, now young adults in their own right, as Sigma-7 was escorted into the space by Dr. Martinez and a small team of specialists. The adult Vorthak was magnificent, standing nearly 8 feet tall with the kind of presence that had once sent entire fleets fleeing. But his posture was careful and non-threatening, and his eyes showed nervous anticipation rather than predatory calculation. Guardian stepped forward, and Alina held her breath as the two Vorthak faced each other. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, neither moved. Then Sigma-7 did something that Alina had never seen an adult Vorthak do. He lowered his head in a gesture of respect and vulnerability. "Little brother," he said, his voice carrying decades of pain and hope, "you saved us all." Guardian's response was pure emotion. He approached Sigma-7 and gently touched his nose to the adult's lowered head. "Not little brother," he said softly, "big brother, family." The sound that Sigma-7 made then was something Alina had never heard from an adult Vorthak, a deep, rumbling purr of pure contentment. Within moments, all 6 cubs had surrounded the adult, offering comfort and acceptance to someone who had spent his entire life believing he was meant to be alone. Dr. Martinez approached Alina with tears in his eyes. 2 months ago, Sigma-7 would have attacked anything that came near him. Today, he's being welcomed into a family. Over the following weeks, the integration process accelerated beyond anyone's wildest projections. Sigma-7 wasn't just learning to be social. He was teaching the cubs about aspects of Vorthak culture that had been lost to isolation for generations. He shared stories of the old ways, when Vorthak lived in complex social groups and worked together to build civilizations that rivaled any in the galaxy. "We were explorers once," Sigma-7 told Alina during one of their evening conversations. "Before the Great Scattering, before the isolation protocols, my people built cities among the stars. We were scientists, artists, philosophers. The galaxy forgot, and eventually so did we." Alina listened with fascination as Sigma-7 recounted histories that had never appeared in any galactic database. According to his ancestral memories, the Vorthak had become isolated not by choice, but by necessity, retreating from a galactic war that had nearly destroyed them. Generations of defensive isolation had gradually warped their social structures until they forgot how to be anything other than solitary predators. "The cubs remember things we thought were lost forever," Sigma-7 continued. "Their games, their social patterns, their echoes of what we used to be. Alina, your family hasn't just raised 6 cubs. You've helped an entire species remember its soul." The success with Sigma-7 opened the floodgates. Within 6 months, rehabilitation centers were established across the galaxy, each one staffed with specialists trained in the techniques developed at Zirian Station. Adult Vorthak began volunteering for the program in unprecedented numbers, drawn by stories of others who had found family and belonging. But the most significant change came from an unexpected source: The cubs themselves had grown into powerful advocates for their species. Guardian became the first Vorthak to address the Galactic Council, speaking with eloquence and passion about the need for species-wide rehabilitation programs. "My people are not monsters," he said to the assembled delegates, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "We are wounded healers, lost children who forgot how to find our way home. Alina showed us that home is not a place. It is where you are loved and understood. Every Vorthak adult living in isolation is a child who never learned that they deserve love." Curious had developed educational programs that were being implemented in schools across a dozen systems, teaching young beings of all species about the importance of understanding and compassion in overcoming fear and prejudice. Healer had established the first interspecies medical exchange program, training doctors from various species to work with Vorthak physiology while learning techniques that could benefit medical practice throughout the galaxy. Artist sculptures and environmental designs had become the standard for rehabilitation facilities, creating spaces that promoted healing and social connection. Explorer had mapped safe travel routes for newly rehabilitated Vorthak, establishing a network of support stations across the galaxy. Peaceful had perhaps made the greatest impact of all, developing therapeutic techniques that helped traumatized adults overcome decades of isolation conditioning. Her gentle approach and intuitive understanding of emotional healing had been adopted by psychological services throughout galactic space. 2 years after first finding 6 scared cubs sleeping in her quarters, Alina stood before the completed memorial wall in the center's main hall. The wall honored both the Vorthak who had died in isolation, never knowing they could have had families, and the beings of all species who had worked to build bridges of understanding. Guardian approached her, now taller than Alina and bearing the dignified bearing of a natural leader, but still carrying the same gentle spirit she had first fallen in love with. "Sad thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her with the easy familiarity of family. "Happy thoughts, actually," Alina replied, leaning against his warm bulk. "I was thinking about how much has changed. 2 years ago, your species was considered the most dangerous in the galaxy. Today, Vorthak integration specialists are among the most requested diplomatic personnel in Council space." "Change not easy," Guardian observed. "Many still fear, many Vorthak still hurt, but now we have hope, now we know different possible." Alina nodded, watching as Sigma-7 played with a group of multispecies children who had come to visit the center. The adult Vorthak moved with careful gentleness, his powerful frame perfectly controlled as he helped youngsters climb onto his back for rides around the playground. "Guardian," Alina said softly, "do you ever regret it? The way things turned out, you could have had a simple life, maybe even a wild life if we hadn't interfered." Guardian was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the thoughtfulness that had always characterized his approach to important matters. "Alina," he said finally, "you ask if I regret having family, regret learning that love's stronger than fear, regret helping pack members find happiness." He turned to look at her with those remarkable eyes that had first captured her heart. "You saved 6 cubs. Cubs saved species. Species will save others. This is what family does, makes galaxy bigger, warmer, safer for all children." As evening fell over the integration center, Alina watched the daily gathering that had become a tradition. Vorthak from across the rehabilitation network would join together via holographic link for what they called the evening song, a complex harmony of voices that connected isolated individuals with their larger family. Tonight, for the first time, they were joined by Vorthak who had never needed rehabilitation, cubs who had been born into loving families and raised with the social connection that was their birthright. The song they created together was unlike anything Alina had ever heard, a sound that seemed to bridge past and future, pain and hope, isolation and belonging. Standing there, surrounded by the family that had changed everything, Alina realized that this was just the beginning. The techniques developed with the Vorthak were already being adapted to help other species overcome trauma and isolation. The galaxy was learning that no being was meant to be alone, that every creature deserved the chance to find their place in the larger family of sentient life. As Guardian often said in his speeches to young beings across the galaxy, family not about species or biology, family about choosing to care for each other, choosing to make safe spaces where everyone can grow. Alina taught us this truth: love bigger than fear, stronger than hate, deeper than the space between stars. 6 cubs had vanished from their containment area only to be found sleeping peacefully on a human's chest. But they had awakened to find something far more valuable than safety. They had found their way to a family that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to belong. And in research stations, rehabilitation centers, and homes across the galaxy, other lost children of every species were learning the same truth that Alina had discovered on that first morning, when she woke up covered in warm fur and gentle purrs. The most powerful force in the universe wasn't gravity or nuclear energy or hyperspace technology. It was love, freely given and unconditionally shared, strong enough to transform predators into protectors and turn monsters into family.